Once upon a time, in 17th century England, there existed a rarity, a very small man whose name was Jeffrey Hudson, sometimes known as the Queen's Dwarf. His bizarre story took him from royal courts to exotic lands. Although he may have been only 18 inches tall and adored by many, when one man insulted his honor, to the shock of many, he would commit a surprisingly heinous act. Although we don't know the exact date, Jeffrey Hudson was born sometime in the year 1619 in the town of Oakham, England. His father worked as a bull trainer for the Duke of Buckingham, supporting his wife and 4 children, and despite his hard work, the family grew up poor. As time went on, they soon noticed something very peculiar about their son, Jeffrey. Unlike other children, he appeared to stop growing quite early, reaching only 18 inches of height. He was the only one in his family with this condition. His uniqueness caused many onlookers to offer their own explanations for Hudson's size. One theory they came up with placed the blame on his mother, claiming it was because she had choked on a pickle during her pregnancy. Looking back on this from modern times, it's hard to see the reasoning, but back then people had to make sense of the unusual with what they knew. Had Hudson been born today, he would probably be diagnosed with a pituitary gland disorder, causing a deficiency of growth hormone. Also, the fact that he didn't show any other traits associated with dwarfism, he might have even had options to grow normally. Although rather startling, for reasons most likely financial, when Hudson was only 7 years old, his parents agreed to give him up to the Duke and Duchess of Buckingham, reportedly marketing him as a rarity of nature, which impressed the Duke and Duchess enough to take him in. Oddly enough, Hudson's dwarfism didn't make him particularly special in 17th century England. Although people didn't know the cause of the condition, it was not uncommon to find the occasional dwarf here and there. But what made Jeffrey special was that he had extremely good proportions, and this would become his ticket out of poverty. Although it is not entirely clear what Hudson's time with the Duke and Duchess was like, it is likely that he lived in more comfort than previously. It appears that at the time, wealthy people could simply collect unusual folks, just as they might a rare piece of art. This practice of keeping court dwarfs was not unique to England and was a European phenomenon extending back centuries. They were viewed as luxury accessories, symbols of wealth, and a form of entertainment. On one occasion, the Duke and Duchess were privileged with a royal visit from King Charles I and his new wife, the French Catholic Queen Henrietta Maria. They honored them with an elaborate dinner that hid a surprise they could not have been expecting. For dessert, the cooks were ordered to create a very large pie, and it was arranged for Hudson to be tucked away and hidden inside the pie, after it was baked, of course. After the meal, the servant brought out the massive pie and presented it to the Queen. To her surprise, the pie started to move, and Hudson popped out, fully dressed in armor, and paraded up and down the table with a flag. The Queen was absolutely delighted. Hudson entertained everyone in attendance, and the Duke and Duchess offered him as a gift to the Queen. She took him back to her castle, and a new chapter began for Jeffrey in the royal court. From now on, Hudson would be known by the moniker of Lord Minimus, one of the Queen's favorites, and would remain in her service for nearly 2 decades. Just like his prior position with the Duke and Duchess, Hudson was once again a trinket of sorts, this time to the Queen. Upon his arrival, he noticed that the Queen had already been busy amassing a few other rarities, which included several other little people, a monkey, and a man who stood over 7 feet tall. Hudson and the tall man, who was Welsh and named William Evans, became very close friends, and would even walk down the street together, with Hudson tucked inside Evans' pocket. On some occasions, they even performed a gag where Evans pulled out a loaf of bread and Hudson out of his pocket and mimed making a sandwich with him as the main ingredient. This visual contrast between the two men was a never-ending source of entertainment at court, and both Evans and Hudson were often depicted together in paintings and engravings. The most famous of these is the painting by the celebrated court artist Sir Anthony Van Dyck, completed around 1633. The painting, titled Queen Henrietta Maria with Sir Jeffrey Hudson, shows Hudson standing beside the Queen, holding a small monkey on a chain. Aside from hanging out with his tall friend, Hudson participated in shows and performances at court, received a proper education, went on hunting trips, and ate very well. At one point, he was even given his own servant. Because he was very admired at court, Hudson often joined the royals on horseback rides, and even had a special saddle made just for him, along with expensive clothing to wear. Around the time Hudson was age 10, he joined the court when they headed to France in order to find a midwife for the Queen, who was pregnant at the time. On the return to England, their ship was commandeered by pirates. Luckily, on this occasion, the pirates merely raided their ship and let them continue on their way. Yet, this would not be Hudson's last encounter with piracy. In 1642, a war began in England, known today as the English Civil War, between people who supported the king, the royalists, and those who did not, the parliamentarians. The Queen, along with Hudson, went to the Netherlands to raise some funds in support of the king. On their return, the Queen and her entourage stopped for the night in Yorkshire. The following morning, they awoke to the sound of ship cannons from the king's enemies. Despite his size, Hudson was brave at heart and reportedly leapt from his bed, ready to fight. Luckily for him, the adversaries didn't leave their ships, and he didn't have to engage in any combat that day. Continuing their journey, and this time stopping in York, they once again came under siege. A confrontation ensued, and though details are hard to confirm, Hudson likely participated. As a result of the battle, the Queen bestowed upon Hudson the title Captain of Horse. He would value this greatly, and would go by Captain Jeffrey Hudson for the rest of his life. Although the title was largely honorary, Hudson used it to assert his identity as a serious man of action, and a man who is deserving of respect, and not just simple affections. With all this unrest in England, the Queen, along with Hudson, ended up fleeing to France for the time being. They took up residence in the French royal court, where Queen Henrietta Maria's family provided them sanctuary. At this time in his life, Hudson was now a young man, and grew a bit dissatisfied with his status as an oddity of the Queen's court. He wanted to be taken more seriously and respected as an adult, not just viewed as a pet of the Queen. In a letter to a friend, Hudson reportedly vented his frustrations, complaining that courtiers still addressed him as, quote, "my little lord," despite his military rank. These temperaments would soon boil over when, in 1644, Hudson got into a heated confrontation with a man named Charles Croft, who was the brother of an English baron, William Croft. We don't know exactly what occurred, but Croft must have done something that impugned Hudson's honor, and Hudson challenged him to a duel. The fact that Hudson was also now a captain made the insults from Croft even more egregious. Croft evidently didn't take the situation too seriously, as he showed up to the duel with something of a water gun. Hudson, by contrast, was not joking around and was armed with a real pistol and mounted on a horse, giving him a level playing field. As could be expected, considering their weapons, Croft did not survive the exchange. That evening, the Queen's confessor, Father Philip, heard Hudson's confession and noted that he showed no remorse, only indignation. Charles Croft's decision to arrive at the duel armed with a water gun implied that he did not view Hudson as a man worthy of a true fight, but rather as an object of ridicule, deserving only a child's game. The fact that Hudson later showed no remorse at all showed how seriously he took the situation, and the lengths that he would go to defend his honor, with force if necessary. In the end, Hudson won the fight but lost his freedom. Although duels were common in England at the time, in France they were outlawed, and they happened to be in France at the moment. The French authorities arrested Hudson and had him sentenced to be executed for his indiscretion. As it turned out, the English were also not happy with Hudson, as they had considered Croft a man of importance. Despite his predicament, the Queen still cared about Hudson and pleaded on his behalf to the French authorities, even reportedly weeping openly for his clemency. Luckily for Hudson, they respected her opinion, and his life was spared. However, Hudson was removed from the court and sent back to England. The duel and the resulting scandal proved to be a line the Queen could not allow him to cross while remaining in her service, and thus his chapter as a prized possession of the Queen was over. Little did he know, but the next stage of his life would be a far cry from the luxury he was used to. On his way back to England across the Channel, just like had happened before, Barbary pirates raided the ship he was on. This time, the pirates didn't let Hudson go, and he, along with several other passengers, were taken captive and transported to North Africa to begin their new lives as slaves. During this era, Barbary corsairs were predominantly based in Algiers, Tripoli, and Tunis, and routinely captured ships around Europe and the Mediterranean, selling the Europeans into a vast network of North African slave markets. The capture occurred off the Isles of Scilly in 1645. Hudson was sold in the slave market at Algiers and later transferred to the interior, where he labored in quarries and as a household servant. Hudson would spend the next 25 years as a slave, enduring labor, misery, and humiliation. For some reason, and according to Hudson himself, during this time he physically grew to about 4 feet in height. He insisted that it was a result of the hardships that he had endured. Medical historians believe delayed puberty triggered by malnutrition and later improved diet while in captivity could account for his growth spurt, although Hudson attributed it to, quote, the heat of the African sun and the vigor of labor. Although he was bigger now and likely stronger, he was no longer the same rarity that he had been earlier in his life. In the 1660s, an English expedition, which had set out to North Africa to free their enslaved people, found Hudson and rescued him. Now, free at last, they returned him to his homeland. Now much older and more feeble, Hudson returned home to a changed England. A new king ruled the land, King Charles II, and his beloved queen was gone as well. Hudson got himself acquainted with the historian James Wright in order that he might share for posterity the outlandish experiences of his lifetime. After time spent with James, in 1676, Hudson returned to London to seek some sort of compensation from the court that he'd been a part of for so long. It just so happened that this was not the most ideal time to visit London, as serious political and religious unrest was then in motion. Conspiracies abounded that scheming Catholics wanted to assassinate the English Protestant king. This was known as the Popish Plot, a widespread panic and climate which led to many indiscriminate arrests and persecutions of English Catholics and often those they simply assumed to be. When Hudson arrived, he was immediately arrested by the authorities on suspicion that he was a Catholic, which was most likely because of his connection to the former queen, Henrietta Maria, who had been a French Catholic. The fact that Hudson had spent a lengthy amount of time in the service of a Catholic, as well as had lived in France during the war, made him an easy target for the paranoid Protestant authorities. Sadly, for the aging Hudson, he would be imprisoned for a total of 4 years before he was released. Now quite elderly and most likely with a few ailments, the last known trace of Hudson's existence is a record of some compensation that he received from Charles II. Despite his many years of service to the monarchy, it's unlikely that it was very much, and Hudson passed away sometime in 1682. The details of this and where Hudson was buried remain a mystery to this day, but it's likely that he was buried as a pauper, possibly in a common grave and without any of the splendor of his former life at court. Although he was gone, his legacy would live on, and many artists used his story as an inspiration, creating portraits of him along with poems and stories, even if they sometimes mischievously poked fun at his stature. If you enjoyed this Factinate video, give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more incredible stories. Want a say in who we cover next? Join our membership program through the link in the description for exclusive perks. Your support means everything to us. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.